feeling sad most of the time, losing
Oh,
interest in things
no,
you once cared about, you
commercial.
may be experiencing
My
these and other
bad.
symptoms that are difficult to understand.
My
These
bad.
symptoms are worth exploring with a doctor. Learn more about major depressive disorder.
No commercial. Hi, my friends. Hello, friendships. Welcome to another live gathering for the Salt Circle, where we come together to explore, navigate, and validate our curiosities or experiences with themes like codependency, dysfunctional families, things like that. On Wednesdays, I like to really focus on death, dying, and bereavement. And so I welcome you to another Wednesday episode where we're going to explore the complexities of, you know, death, dying, and grief, and how that can really come up in dysfunctional families or uh, dynamics that are codependent. So I don't know if you're here for the first time or if this is, something that you've been to before, but either way, welcome. I am your host. My name is Daniela, and let's get started. So today I really was thinking a lot about acceptance when it comes to grief and loss. And, obviously when someone dies, you have to accept that. That's a fact. That's, an inevitable phenomenon that every living thing will go through. So the fact that it's something that's taboo, is one thing, but I think when you're dealing with death or someone dying, and that person is dysfunctional, it adds another layer of complexity to it that I don't think anyone is really prepared for. I don't think in our society, in America, we really prepare ourselves or, educate anyone about what to do if you or a loved one is going through an illness or an end of life, situation. And that's a shame. But that's not really what I was thinking about when it came to acceptance. So the best way for me to relate the things that go on in my head and the shadow work that I've been doing is by just I'm gonna just explain to you like I would if you were a friend, and like if you were here and you're like, hey, what the fuck is wrong with you? I'll be like, hey, okay, this is it. So I don't know. Grab some wine if you'd like. I'm okay on wine. But so when it comes to, for me, my grief, and there's so many different ways to feel grief, right? But, you can also feel grief when someone is still alive. And I think when you're dealing with someone who has an addiction or a really dysfunctional or toxic pattern of behaviors or lifestyle choices. They live in a way that cannot coincide with you, who is someone who's healing and trying to be healthy. So, um, sorry, I just heard my dog bark. But anyway, like what I really learned when my grandparents were diagnosed with their terminal illnesses, there was an acceptance to that fact. We had to, you know, despite the addiction and dysfunction that was going on and the make believe la la land that my grandparents tried to create in order to enable their son, my father, um, there was this piercing, you know, thing that just came into their reality like a spaceship into the atmosphere that was inescapable. And it really raised a lot of questions for my dad, who, since, from what I've heard, I don't know how true this is because I wasn't alive, but, my father was a drug addict since he was, 13 years old or whatever the fuck the story is. So there became a lot of, grief and mourning and realizations for, my grandparents as they received their diagnoses or diagnoses, whatever the word is. But there was also kind of, you know, grief and relief, I think, can, be tethered together, especially when it's a dysfunctional relationship or the person is someone who is, dysfunctional, we'll just say. And, you know, when there was this realization for my grandparents that we had, like when I say we, I mean me and my Aunt Donna, who was my grandfather, my grandmother's daughter, my dad's sister, there was, of course, like this stark realization of, okay, now your death is more in the forefront. Everyone knows that they're going to die eventually, but then to have a diagnosis, something that is on paper that says, hey, these symptoms that you've been ignoring for the last 20 years are actually COPD, that's pretty bad. Uh, you know, um, and learning that after he had a heart attack and he had stents put in, and that he needs to be in oxygen. And then when it got to the point that it was obvious that the mourning or the realization didn't hit the drug addict, my father, and with when you're trying to be healthy and you see everything in an outside perspective and you're trying to remove yourself from this dysfunction, it was sad even more so to see, like, okay, this man, my father, when these people, his parents, really do die, the fact that he is not going to be able to accept it or function, like however that's going to play, you have to let it play out. Um, and I think it was easier to think about my father's, end of life choices that he's made. All of his life has culminated into how he's going to inevitably experience the end of his life. You know what I mean? Um, and that it wasn't going to be anything pleasant. Let's just say, as a lifelong drug addict and career criminal who has had mommy and daddy to enable him and get him out of prison and just, you know, finance all of his escapades, to going to basically living on the street under a bridge in the Bronx, still as a drug addict. I think it was easier for me and other people who knew of the situation to accept that. And then when my grandparents, kind of were passing away. Some people thought that my father might snap out of his addiction, or he might, realize the gravity of the situation and really want to take more of a hand in it. But I really I really believe that there is a point of addiction, no matter what kind of addiction it is. I really believe that there is a point where, there's no returning to just a normal person. I think after 40 odd years as a drug addict, just completely enabled to the brim, his parents, since he was, ever since he was a little kid, just he lived with his parents. His parents drove him everywhere, gave him money for prostitutes, would bail him out of jail, buy him cars, set him up in apartments. They would just pay for everything. And he would still just constantly fall into his drug habits because he didn't have to ever try, and my grandfather was really successful when he was younger. And, there's stories that grandpa bought my dad a tow truck company, and my dad just like still just continuously fucked up every chance given to him. And my grandparents were so afraid of their son dying or going to jail, so they just kept him. They wouldn't allow any, phones in the house because they didn't want anyone to call 911 because they didn't want their son to get arrested. You know, it was choices were made. And it got to the point where, my father's addiction, I really genuinely believe that he was never going to come back to being who he was or who he could have been. Um, and I really think that at a certain point, he stopped being a person who had an addiction, or he had a behavioral problem, or he was coping for something. And I think it really turned into eventually just being solely dependent on narcotics. And it, he was just a 13-year-old drug addict. He never grew up. It was insane. It was no. Um and it was easy to recognize that and accept that, right? Um but all throughout my life, I always oscillated between feeling sorry for my grandparents and blaming them, because I understood eventually that they were completely enabling him. They knew what he was doing, but they didn't want to admit it. They would never admit it. And eventually there had to come the realization for me that they were equally as sick. They had a different kind of addiction, a different kind of sickness. They really were delusional and vicious about keeping their son safe and, shielding him from all responsibilities. And they've done that for, 50 fucking years, basically. So to accept that part, was way harder for me, because I always wanted to feel like my grandparents were like these victims, like they just wanted to protect their son, which was true. But it got to a point, especially when like grandma was like dying and she wanted to die at home, and my dad was like literally stealing her medication, and the hospice nurses, like, I'm getting calls, they're just like, we're not coming to the house anymore because your dad is like arguing with us, and he's like smoking cigarettes in front of like, like the oxygen tanks, because and I'm just like, what am I supposed to do? And they're like, you're not supposed to do anything, honey. Like, we've seen this, but we're just telling you, like, it's going to get, harder for you because you're not going to have that kind of support. And he just did not care. He did not. And for my grandparents to also still take his side, like they would call the police on me because they're like, "Oh, we just want you to get along with our son." And it's just like, this isn't happening. Like, and then to allow them See, and that's where this all culminates to the grand fucking epiphany, right? Um, to accept my dad was one thing, right? But to accept my grandparents and that they had chosen this life. They might have been so far in their delusions and their own sickness and their own desire that had been mutated into a compulsion. Um, it sorry, I'm trying not to lose my train of thought. You know, wait, shit, shit. I like try to make myself like not sad about it, and then like my brain fucks off too hard, and it's like, wait, not no, don't etch a sketch it. um, to accept that my grandparents were going to, you know, it was one thing that my dad was gonna die without dignity and alone and whatever. But it was another thing to accept that my grandparents were also going to die in a way that, I didn't want for them specifically, but how far can you go against what they themselves have steered their life into? So, oh, sugar, there's my dog. He's okay. He's just outside. Oh, boober, chunky boogie boy. Oh my goodness. The acceptance as well that despite, and it was very hard because I know that I'm codependent. I do. And it stems from my family. It does. As much as I am no contact or I hate my family or whatever the fuck you want to call it or dice it down to, it's very, very complicated because it's very dysfunctional. And the the radical acceptance of allowing my grandparents to die basically in squalor was so tough of reality to accept because I felt like I could do something about it, right? And I tried. I quit my job. I moved in. I tried being this buffer between my father's addiction, my grandfather's enabling, grandma's death, grandpa's death, and now it's just I don't even know what the fuck my dad is up to, but all I know is that like I don't even care. Um and that acceptance of, like all that I sacrificed obviously wasn't I shouldn't have done it because these people have, you can't sacrifice that like that to intervene in someone's course of their own end of life choices. Um, and it's a shame because, I really did not want grandma to die alone or in pain, but that's really what it boiled down to. And there was no there was no helping it is what that acceptance I had to come to. And I still have trouble coming to it. And I think that's why I developed a little bit of an eating disorder, like for 2 years after, like, because it was just so fucked up. Yeah, and I think you can try and try and try and be as angry as possible and do as much as you can and spend all of your fucking savings and, just put yourself on the front lines of going back into dysfunction to usher someone into a kinder death, and it is just completely for nothing. And you were looked at as the enemy. So then when your grandfather is going through the same thing, to really just allow it, to really just, you want to believe your son can do no wrong. And, my grandfather really, he was like, well, my son is my best friend. And it's like, your son literally is such a parasite. And grandpa just was relegated. He's just like, that's my son. If I'm gonna die because I can't breathe and I'm waiting for him in Poughkeepsie, then, that's what just is gonna, like, that's my son. I owe it to him because he feels guilty because he was a drug addict. No, not a drug addict. Grandpa was an alcoholic for a while and, like, just always, I don't know. I have no idea. Whatever the mystery is, the lore, the origin story of my grandfather feels very guilty and very responsible. So he would never. Oh, hold on. My dog wants to come in. Hold on. Watch out. Okay. So the way that my very rational and architect businessman of a grandfather allowed himself to self-medicate on romanticizing the best in someone. He really wanted to believe that his son was just sick. It's just an illness. They're just prostitutes. Don't you know a man's got needs? And it got to such a twisted point that nothing my father could do would ever, screaming at her as she's dying from fucking lung cancer in the living room. It was just, and even grandma still, she basically told me to fuck off and leave her son alone when I was trying to get him away from her, but like what? He just like wanted her cigarettes or he wanted a ride. I forget what it was. But it was just so fucked up how my grandparents would never give up their son, right? He could steal your car out of the driveway because he stole your keys and your wallet because you left it in the purse. You just left it in the kitchen. And it's still your fault, and they still would never admit that it was their son. Even if the footprints in the snow led back from the car that was crashed into the telephone right at the corner of the street and just walk, they still would not. So you have to accept that when they they were passing away, like, what could you really do to undo that level of devotion and delusion? And, people used to say to me, like, oh, your dad will snap out of it, yada, yada, yada. And even I had this misplaced fucking assumption that random family members would come out of nowhere and offer help because grandpa was like one of 12 and grandma was one of 9. And nobody gave a shit. Nobody really helped because everyone else has already accepted what I've been too codependent and I guess close to the situation to really, I was just, slow to the learning of you have to allow people the lives that they want to lead. And some people are going to lead really dysfunctional fucking lives and like you don't have to. But the people that do, uh you can't save them. Just like, no one's going to come and save you. You can't save, for me, I couldn't step in and save my grandparents. And while I feel very immensely guilty that grandma died in fucking agony, we just fucking left alone like a dog in the living room. And grandpa honestly probably was lying on the floor for a few hours before he fucking finally died. But I don't fucking know. Because I wasn't there. And I mean, I cleaned his remains out of the carpet because we had to rent out the house. But, even that was easier to accept, I think, than the fact that grandpa wanted to die like that. I offered for him to move into my house or, I would pick him up and we would go anywhere, wherever you want to do, grandpa. We could drive around the country as long as you want. He did not want, he just always wanted to be around for his son. And while that was cute and everything, it was just like, then this is, so can you really prevent that kind of ending? He didn't want anyone there. He didn't want to leave. And that acceptance, that radical acceptance of it's almost more of a healthy way to love to just allow and observe, to see someone at the end of their life and to, maybe see them for all their faults and all their bad choices and just, but it's easier to fucking say that because like I wish I could like go back in time obviously and like fucking do this and like just practice it and like, oh, let me just talk to my father as I should have fucking, it's like maybe that's why I'm just talking endlessly to you. I'm just talking to myself basically because no one, I don't know, I just ramble. Um, yeah, it's that acceptance that, there's a point of no return for drug addicts and addicts or dysfunctional people or risky behavior people or whatever, but there's also a point of no return for the enablers. And all enablers start out as people who are, codependent. So the the realization that I am much alike to my grandparents kind of, of course scares me, but I don't have anyone in my life that I would enable, or I don't think that I would enable anymore. We can definitely discuss people that we have enabled in the past. I think that would be a really interesting topic. Um, the acceptance of loss. I'm really interested to see if anyone has any, thoughts on that or if anyone commented. So I'm just going to check the comments really quickly. Yeah, no, nothing. Okay. Well, whatever. I'm enjoying speaking to you in case, whoever you are, see this video whenever you need it, because I'm sure if I've gone through this, other people will go through it. Um, so yeah, that Radical acceptance. I'm curious. The dog is on the remote. Give me 1 second.